Commander Zix-9 sat in his chair on the observation deck of the Council ship. He watched the same battle that had been going on for 3,000 years. Every day, the same ships fought in the same way. Every day, the same number of ships were destroyed. Every day, the same number of soldiers died. The Kethmori Empire's ships moved in perfect lines across space. Their plasma cannons fired at exactly the right time. Their shields activated at exactly the right moment. They had done this dance so many times that even the youngest soldier knew every step. On the other side, the Vex collective ships swarmed. Like angry insects. Thousands of small fighters moved as one mind. They attacked, retreated, and attacked again. Their biological weapons spread across enemy hulls like living metal. CYX-9 had been watching this war longer than most beings lived. He had studied every battle, read every report, and calculated every possible outcome. The math was simple and beautiful in its horror. Neither side could win, neither side could lose. They were perfectly matched in their ability to kill each other. The commander's assistant, a young being named Veltu, floated beside his chair. "Sir, the daily report shows the same results as always. 17 Kethmori ships destroyed, 15 Vex fighters lost. Both sides will retreat in 3 hours. To repair and resupply?" Zix-9 nodded without looking away from the battle. "Just like yesterday, just like tomorrow will be." The war had started over a simple thing. The Kethmori found a mining world rich in rare metals. The Vex wanted the same world for their expanding population. Both species claimed the planet first. Both had proof. Both refused to share. What began as a small dispute grew into the longest war in galactic history. It spread from one world to 17 star systems. Billions had died. Entire generations had been born, lived, and died knowing nothing but this endless conflict. The Galactic Mediation Council had tried to stop the war many times. They sent diplomats who spoke of peace. They offered other worlds as alternatives. They proposed sharing agreements and trade deals. Nothing worked. The Kethmori were a proud warrior race. Honor meant everything to them. They fought in formations their ancestors had used for 10,000 years. To change their tactics would dishonor the dead. To retreat permanently would dishonor their children. The Vex were different but equally stubborn. They were a hive mind, billions of individual creatures thinking as one. They had calculated every possible outcome of the war. Their collective intelligence was vast, but it could only think in certain ways. They saw 2 choices, victory or extinction. Other species had tried to help. The peaceful Xantharians offered to mediate. The scientific Altarians provided detailed analysis of why the war could not be won. The trading guilds calculated the economic cost and showed both sides how much wealth was being wasted. None of it mattered. The war continued. Zix-9 remembered his first day observing this conflict. He had been young then, full of hope that logic and reason could solve any problem. He believed that if 2 intelligent species could just sit down and talk, they would find a solution. That was 800 years ago. Now he was old, tired, and wise enough to know that some problems had no solutions. Some wars were like forces of nature. You could study them, predict them, even prepare for them. But you could not stop them. The battle below followed its usual pattern. The Kethmori formed their ships into a perfect triangle formation. Their flagship, the Honor's Edge, took the center position. Smaller cruisers protected the flanks. The formation had not changed in 3 centuries. The Vex responded as they always did. Swarms of fighter craft emerged from their bioships like cells dividing. They moved in complex patterns that looked random but were actually precisely calculated. Every movement was designed to counter Kethmori tactics. Phase 1 began. Kethmori plasma cannons opened fire. Bright green beams cut through space, striking Vex fighters with deadly accuracy. The Vex lost exactly 17 fighters in the first minute, just as they had every day for the past year. Phase 2 followed immediately. Vex bioweapons launched from hidden ports on their larger ships. Living metal spores spread across space like a cloud. When they touched Kethmori hulls, they began eating through the armor. The Kethmori lost 2 escort ships, just as predicted. Zix-9 could recite the rest of the battle from memory. In Phase 3, the Kethmori would activate their cleansing beams to burn off the bioweapons. The Vex would respond by sending suicide fighters to crash into damaged ships. Both sides would trade losses for exactly 2 hours and 47 minutes. Then both fleets would retreat to opposite ends of the system. They would spend the night repairing their ships and planning tomorrow's battle. Tomorrow's battle would be exactly the same as today's battle. The commander's datapad chimed with an incoming message. It was from the Council's main headquarters, asking for his daily report. Zix-9 began typing the same words he had typed thousands of times before. Day 1,095,847 of the Kethmori Vex conflict. Battle commenced at 0800 Standard Time. Kethmori forces deployed in Formation Delta 7. Vex forces responded with Swarm Pattern Gamma 3. Estimated casualties. He stopped typing and stared at the screen. 1,095,847 days. Nearly 3,000 years of the same battle, fought the same way. With the same results. Vel 2 noticed his hesitation. Sir? Is something wrong with the report? Zix-9 looked at his young assistant. Vel 2 had only been assigned to this post for 50 years. To him, this war was still new and interesting. He studied each battle as if it might be different from the last. He still believed that understanding the conflict might lead to solving it. The commander envied that hope. Tell me, Vel 2, Zix-9 said slowly. In all your studies, have you ever found a single battle in this war that was different from any other? The young being's energy field flickered with thought. Well, sir, there was the Battle of Kepler 7, where the Kethmori lost 18 ships instead of 17. And the Great Swarm of year 2847, when the Vex deployed an extra 1,000 fighters. And what happened in those battles? The same thing that always happens, sir. Both sides fought until their losses became too great, then they retreated to fight. Again the next day, Zix-9 nodded. Exactly, this war is not about winning or losing anymore. It has become something else entirely. It is a ritual, a dance, a natural law. He gestured toward the battle raging outside their ship. Look at them, every movement is practiced. Every attack is expected. They are not trying to destroy each other anymore. They are simply following the steps of a dance they have performed so many times that they cannot remember how to stop. Vel 2 was quiet for a long moment. Then why do we continue to watch? Why do we keep making reports? The old commander smiled sadly. Because someone must bear witness. Someone must record what happens when 2 great civilizations become trapped by their own certainty. Future generations must know that this war was not caused by hatred or greed, or fear. It was caused by the inability to imagine any other way of living. The battle below reached its climax. Kethmori and Vex ships engaged in close combat, their weapons lighting up the darkness of space. It was beautiful in its terrible precision. Every explosion happened exactly where it was supposed to. Every casualty had been calculated in advance. In exactly 37 minutes, both fleets would break off and retreat. Tomorrow, they would return and fight the exact same battle again. Zix-9 finished his report and sent it to Council headquarters. Somewhere in the vast bureaucracy of galactic government, his words would be filed away with millions of other identical reports. No one would read them. No one would act on them. They were simply a record of the most predictable event in the known universe. The commander was about to close his observation post when his long-range sensors detected something unusual. A small group of ships was approaching the system from the outer rim. The ships were unfamiliar in design, clearly belonging to a species he had never encountered. Vel 2, he called to his assistant. Are we expecting any new observers? The young being checked his communications board. No, sir, no scheduled arrivals for the next 6 months. Zix-9 focused his sensors on the approaching vessels. There were 12 ships in total, medium-sized and built for long-distance travel rather than combat. Their whole design was strange, using metals and techniques he did not recognize. "Sir," Vel2 said with excitement in his voice, "I'm picking up their identification signals. They claim to be from a species called humans." The old commander searched his vast memory banks. In 800 years of galactic service, he had encountered over 4,000 different species. He had never heard of humans. "Are they listed in the Galactic Registry?" "No, sir, according to these readings. They are completely unknown to the Council. They appear to be heading directly into the combat zone." Zix9 felt something he had not experienced in centuries: surprise. Something genuinely unexpected was about to happen in the most predictable place in the galaxy. He opened a communication channel to the approaching ships. "Unknown vessels, this is Commander Zix9 of the Galactic Mediation Council. You are entering an active war zone. For your safety, please alter course immediately." The response came back in clear galactic standard, spoken with an accent he had never heard before. "This is Captain Sarah Chun of the human ship Defiance. We received your warning, Commander. We're not planning to engage in combat. We're just passing through. Captain Chun, I must insist that you retreat to a safe distance. This conflict has been ongoing for 3,000 years. Both sides are extremely hostile to outside interference." There was a pause before the human captain replied. When she spoke again, there was something in her voice that Zix9 could not identify. It sounded almost like ... amusement. 3,000 years of the same fight? That's got to be some kind of record. "Don't worry, Commander. We'll be careful." The human ships continued on their course toward the battle zone. Zix9 watched in fascination as they approached the area where Kethmori and Vex forces were locked in their eternal dance of destruction. For the first time in 800 years, he had no idea what was about to happen next. The galaxy's most predictable war was about to encounter its first truly unpredictable element. Captain Sarah Chun stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, looking at the strangest tactical display she had ever seen. Two massive fleets faced each other across a few million kilometers of space, locked in what appeared to be the most polite war in history. "Lieutenant Torres," she called to her tactical officer, "tell me what you're seeing out there." Maria Torres frowned at her instruments. "It's like watching a chess game, Captain. Both sides are following predetermined moves. The Kethmori form up in triangle formation every single time. The Vex respond with the same swarm pattern. They exchange fire for exactly 2 hours and 47 minutes, then both sides retreat. Casualties? Consistent losses on both sides. 17 Kethmori ships, 15 Vex fighters, give or take 1 or 2. It's like they're not trying to win, just trying to maintain some kind of balance." Chun shook her head. She had served in 3 different interstellar conflicts during her 20-year career. She had seen desperate last stands, brilliant tactical innovations, and crushing defeats. She had never seen anything like this. Her communications officer, Ensign Park, looked up from his station. "Captain, I'm receiving data from the Council observer ship. They've sent us a complete tactical analysis of this conflict." The data appeared on the main screen. Charts, graphs, and battle projections filled the display. Everything was neat, organized, and utterly predictable. Both fleets followed the same patterns day after day, year after year, century after century. Chief Engineer Rodriguez whistled. Softly, Madre Maya, 3,000 years of this. How is that even possible? Dr. Sarah Kim, the ship's xenobiologist, was studying the cultural profiles of both species. "It makes sense from their perspective," she said. "The Kethmori are bound by honor codes that prevent them from changing tactics. To fight differently would be to dishonor their ancestors. The Vex are a collective intelligence that has calculated every possible outcome. They've determined that this stalemate is the optimal result." "Optimal for what?" Chun asked. "Survival. Neither side can win, but neither side can lose either. From their point of view, this eternal war is better than the risk of total defeat." Chun looked at the battle raging on her screen. Ships exploded in perfectly timed sequences. Weapons fired at precisely calculated intervals. It was warfare reduced to mathematics, stripped of all humanity and creativity. It was also completely insane. "Captain," Torres said, "we're receiving communications from both fleets. They want to know which side we're supporting." The main screen split to show two very different alien faces. On the left was Admiral Vex of the Kethmori, a tall being with features that looked like they were carved from stone. His uniform was covered in medals and honors from 3 millennia of warfare. On the right was Hivenode Prime of the Vex Collective, a pale creature with large black eyes and skin that seemed to shift and flow like liquid. "Human vessel," Admiral Vex spoke in a deep, formal voice. "You have entered a sacred battlefield. Honor demands that you declare your allegiance. Will you stand with the righteous forces of the Kethmori Empire?" Before Chun could respond, the Vex spoke in a voice that sounded like thousands of beings talking at once. "Unknown species. Your presence creates variables in our calculations. Clarify your position immediately. Will you join the collective in our struggle against the Empire?" Chun looked at both aliens for a long moment. Then she smiled in a way that would have worried anyone who knew her well. "Gentlemen," she said politely, "I appreciate your offers, but we're not here to join your war. We're just passing through, on our way to establish a colony." Both alien leaders looked confused. Admiral Vex spoke first. "Passing through? This is impossible. All species must choose a side. It is the way of warfare." "Negative," the Vex agreed. "Military doctrine requires a binary selection. You must designate ally or enemy status immediately." Chun's smile grew wider. "Actually, we don't have to do anything. This is a big galaxy and there's room for everyone, including people who just want to mind their own business." The confusion on both alien faces was almost comical. These were beings who had spent 3,000 years locked in conflict. The idea that someone might simply choose not to participate was beyond their understanding. "But the mining rights," Admiral Vex protested. "The system belongs to the Kethmori, by right of first discovery." "Incorrect," the Vex responded instantly. "Archaeological evidence proves collective settlement preceded Empire arrival by 4.7 standard days." Chun held up her hand. Wait. You're fighting over mining rights? To one planet?" "It is a matter of honor," Vex said firmly. "It is a matter of survival," the Vex added. Chun looked at her crew. Torres was shaking her head in disbelief. Rodriguez was muttering something in Spanish that the universal translator refused to repeat. Dr. Kim was taking notes with the enthusiasm of a scientist who had just discovered a new species of insanity. "Let me get this straight," Chun said slowly. "For 3,000 years, you've been fighting over who gets to mine one planet. In all that time, neither of you thought to maybe ... share it?" The silence that followed was so complete that Chun could hear the hum of her ship's engines. Finally, Admiral Vex spoke. "Share? What is this concept?" The Vex were equally baffled. "Definition request. Share. This term does not exist in military tactical databases." Chun rubbed her forehead. She was getting a headache, and they hadn't even reached the really crazy part yet. Sharing means both sides use the same resource. You take turns or divide it up or work together like neighbors sharing a garden. "Neighbors," the Vex repeated. "File search complete. Neighbors are entities that live in proximity but maintain separate territories. This does not apply to resource-rich planetary bodies." "The Empire does not share," Admiral Vex declared. "Sharing is weakness. Sharing is surrender." Chun looked at the tactical display again. Below them, the planet they were fighting over was clearly visible. It was a small, rocky world with obvious signs of mineral wealth. It was also completely empty of any settlements from either side. "Excuse me," she said, "but is anyone actually mining this planet you're fighting over?" Both alien leaders looked uncomfortable. Admiral Vex straightened his uniform. "The planet remains contested territory. Mining operations will commence once the enemy is defeated." "Correct," the Vex agreed. "Resource extraction cannot begin until territorial control is established." Chun stared at them. "So for 3,000 years you've been fighting over a planet that nobody is actually using?" The principle is what matters, Vex insisted. Strategic positioning requires absolute territorial control, the Vex added. Chun turned to her crew. Torres, how long would it take to establish a mining operation on that planet? Her tactical officer ran quick calculations. With our equipment, maybe 6 months for a basic operation. A year for full-scale extraction. And how much or could we extract in that time? Enough to supply both fleets for a decade, easy. That planet is incredibly rich in rare metals. Shun turned back to the alien leaders. Here's a crazy idea. What if we set up a mining operation down there and just ... give you both what you need? The confusion on their faces was replaced by something approaching panic. Impossible, Admiral, Vex said quickly. The Empire cannot accept charity from unknown species. It would be dishonorable. Negative, the Vex responded. Accepting resources without conquest violates fundamental collective principles, Chun sighed. She was beginning to understand why this war had lasted 3,000 years. Both sides were so locked into their ways of thinking that they couldn't imagine any alternatives. Okay, she said, new plan. We're going to land on your planet and set up a humanitarian aid station. A what? Both leaders asked simultaneously. Medical assistance for wounded soldiers. Refugee support for civilians caught in the crossfire. Basic humanitarian services. Helping people who are suffering because of this war. Admiral Vex looked genuinely puzzled. But there are no civilians in the combat zone. Both sides evacuated non-combatants centuries ago. And wounded soldiers are either repaired or recycled according to efficiency protocols, the Vex added. Chun felt her headache getting worse. What about the miners who were working on the planet when this war started? They left, Vex said. Simply relocated to safe territories, the Vex confirmed. 3,000 years ago? Correct. Chun closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them, both alien leaders were still staring at her with expressions of complete bewilderment. Right, she said. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to land on that planet and establish a research station. We're going to study the local geology, catalog the native life forms, and maybe do a little mining on the side. If anyone has a problem with that, they can take it up with human diplomatic corps. But you must choose a side, Admiral Vex protested. Selection is mandatory, the Vex insisted. Chun smiled her most dangerous smile. Gentlemen, let me introduce you to a uniquely human concept. It's called making your own rules. She cut the communication channel and turned to her crew. Torres, prepare a landing party. Rodriguez, I want mining equipment and a prefab research station ready for deployment. Dr. Kim, you're coming with U.S. I have a feeling we're going to need a xenobiologist to figure out what we're dealing with. Captain, Torres said carefully, are you sure about this? We're talking about interfering in a 3,000-year-old war. Shun looked at the tactical display one more time. Two fleets faced each other in the same formations they had used for centuries. Soon they would fight the same battle they fought every day, with the same predictable results. Torres, she said, sometimes the best way to stop a stupid fight is to give both sides something more important to worry about. She walked to the captain's chair and settled in. Take us down to the planet. Let's see what happens when we introduce a little chaos into their perfectly ordered war. On her screen, the Kethmori and Vex fleets continued their eternal dance of destruction. But for the first time in 3,000 years, they had an audience that refused to play by their rules. The most predictable war in galactic history was about to become very unpredictable indeed. The human landing craft touched down on the surface of Kepler 442c, just as the morning battle was beginning overhead. Captain Chain watched through the viewport as Kethmori and Vex ships exchanged their daily volleys of destruction, their weapons, painting the sky with familiar patterns of light and fire. Atmospheric readings are good, reported Lieutenant Torres. Breathable air, normal gravity, temperature within acceptable ranges. This planet should have been perfect for colonization 3,000 years ago. Dr. Kim was already scanning the landscape with her instruments. I'm detecting the ruins of mining operations everywhere. Automated equipment, processing facilities, even what looks like residential areas, all abandoned. Chun stepped out of the craft onto the planet's surface. The ground was scarred with old mining cuts and dotted with the remains of industrial machinery. In the distance, she could see the skeleton of what had once been a thriving settlement. All of this, she said quietly, abandoned because two species couldn't figure out how to share. Chief Rodriguez began unloading equipment from the shuttle. "Where do you want the prefab units, Captain?" Chun pointed to a flat area near what had been the main mining complex. "Set up the medical station there. If we're going to help people, we might as well do it where they used to work." Within hours, the humans had established a functioning outpost. Medical tents, communications equipment, and a small but efficient mining operation sprang up where silence had reigned for millennia. The irony was not lost on Chun that they had accomplished more in one afternoon than the warring fleets had managed in 3,000 years. The first visitors arrived that evening. Dr. Thompson, the expedition's chief medical officer, was setting up his equipment when a shadow fell across the entrance to the medical tent. He looked up to see a Kethmori soldier standing uncertainly at the threshold. The alien was badly injured. Plasma burns covered one side of his body, and his left arm hung useless at his side. According to everything Chen had learned about this, war-wounded soldiers were supposed to be evacuated immediately to their own medical facilities. "Are you lost?" Thompson asked gently. The Kethmori soldier's translator crackled to life. My transport was destroyed during the retreat. I saw your lights. I thought perhaps ... Thompson was already reaching for his medical kit. Come in. Let's take a look at those burns." The soldier hesitated. "But I am Kethmori. You are unknown species. This does not follow protocol." "Son," Thompson said with the patience he had learned during 30 years of emergency medicine, "protocol doesn't help much when you're bleeding. Now sit down and let me fix you up." 20 minutes later, the soldier was bandaged, medicated, and sharing a cup of coffee with the human doctor. His name was Kek 7, and he had been fighting in this war for over 200 years. He had never spoken to a member of another species except to issue surrender demands or receive them. "Your medical techniques are different," Kek 7 said, flexing his newly treated arm. "Kethmori healing focuses on honor and endurance. We bear our scars as badges of courage." Thompson smiled. "Scars are fine for remembering battles, but there's no honor in unnecessary pain. You'll heal faster and fight better with proper treatment." "Fight better?" The alien looked confused. "But you are neutral. Why would you care if I fight better?" It was Thompson's turn to look confused. "I don't want you to fight at all. I want you to heal up and go home to your family." Kek 7 was quiet for a long moment. "Home," he repeated slowly. "I have not seen home in 50 years. There is only the war." Before Thompson could respond, another shadow appeared at the tent entrance. This time it was a Vex drone, its pale skin glistening with some kind of biological fluid. Like the Kethmori soldier, it was badly damaged from the day's battle. Both the human and the Kethmori froze. According to 3,000 years of military protocol, Kek 7 should immediately attack the Vex drone or at least call for backup. The drone should respond with equal aggression. Instead, something unprecedented happened. "You are injured," Kek 7 observed. "Affirmative," the drone replied. "Transport destroyed? Seeking medical assistance?" Thompson looked back and forth between them. "Well," he said practically, "I've got 2 patients and 1 medical tent. You'll have to share." The next few hours would be studied by xenosociologists for generations. A Kethmori warrior and a Vex drone sat side by side while a human doctor treated their wounds. They didn't speak much, but they didn't fight either. They simply existed in the same space without trying to kill each other. When other humans entered the tent, they found the 3 beings engaged in what could only be described as conversation. "The plasma burns from your weapons are very precise," Kek 7 was saying to the drone. "They cause maximum damage with minimal energy expenditure." "Kethmori shielding is equally efficient," the drone replied. "Our bioweapons require significant adaptation to penetrate your defenses." Thompson was listening to this exchange with Growing amazement. Are you two comparing notes on how to kill each other more effectively? Both aliens looked at him with surprise. Of course, Keck 7 said. Professional respect is important, even between enemies. Tactical analysis improves combat effectiveness for both sides, the drone added. Thompson shook his head. You know, there are other things you could talk about. Hobbies, families, what you did before the war started. Before the war? Kex 7 looked genuinely puzzled. There was no before the war. The war is eternal. Incorrect, the drone said. War began 3,247 standard years ago. However, no collective memory exists of pre-war period. So neither of you remember what your people were like before you started fighting? Both aliens shook their heads. The war had consumed their entire civilizations so completely that they had forgotten what they were fighting to preserve. Meanwhile, other human teams were making their own discoveries. Chief Petty Officer Wang had found something that hadn't appeared in any of the tactical reports. Children, they were hiding in the ruins of the old mining settlement. A mixed group of young Kethmori and Vex who had somehow been left behind during the evacuation centuries ago. They had survived by scavenging and hiding, creating their own small society in the abandoned buildings. Wang, who had raised 5 children of her own, took one look at the scared, hungry youngsters and went into full protective mode. How long have you been here? She asked the eldest, a teenage Kethmori named Tex Miner. Always, the child replied. The adults left long ago to fight in the sky. They said they would come back when the war was over. And nobody ever came back? A young Vex drone child scuttled forward. Some came back, but they were changed. They only wanted to fight. They did not remember us. Wang felt her heart break a little. These children had been abandoned by a war that had lasted so long that their own parents had forgotten they existed. Well, she said firmly, you're not alone anymore. Within hours, Wang had organized the refugee children, set up a proper shelter, and established regular meal times. The sight of Kethmori and Vex children playing together was something that should have been impossible, but somehow seemed perfectly natural. Captain Chun found them that evening, engaged in what appeared to be a complex game involving strategy and cooperation. What are they playing? She asked Wang. They call it building. The goal is to work together to construct something useful from whatever materials they can find. The Kethmori children contribute planning and structure, while the Vex children provide adaptation and problem-solving. Chin watched as a young Kethmori carefully explained architectural principles to a group of attentive Vex youngsters. Nearby, a Vex child was teaching Kethmori peers how to weave organic materials into stronger composite structures. They're cooperating, Chun said in wonder. More than cooperating, Wang replied. They're combining their species' natural abilities. The results are actually quite impressive. As if to prove her point, the children proudly showed off their latest creation, a shelter that combined Kethmori engineering precision with Vex biological adaptation. It was stronger and more efficient than anything either species could have built alone. How long have they been doing this? Chun asked. According to them, for centuries. They've developed their own culture, their own way of doing things. They don't see each other as enemies because nobody ever taught them to. Chun felt a strange mixture of hope and sadness. These children represented what their species could have been if the war had never started. They also represented what might still be possible. Word of the human settlement spread quickly through both fleets. By the 3rd day, a steady stream of curious soldiers from both sides was visiting the outpost. They came for medical treatment, for supplies, or simply to see the impossible sight of their enemies working together. The most remarkable visitor was Commander Vex of the Kethmori 3rd Fleet. He arrived with a formal escort, expecting to find a military installation that he could either recruit or destroy. Instead, he found his own wounded soldiers sitting peacefully beside Vex drones, all of them receiving medical care from beings who asked nothing in return except that they try to get along. This does not follow any known military doctrine, he said to Captain Chun. That's because it's not military doctrine, Chun replied. It's just people helping people. Commander Vex watched a human medic bandage a Vex drone while a Kethmori soldier held the medical supplies. The scene was so alien to his worldview that he could barely process it. "But why?" he asked. "What do you gain from this?" Chun smiled. "Maybe that's the wrong question, Commander. Maybe you should. Ask what everyone loses by not doing this?" She gestured toward the children's play area, where young Kethmori and Vex were working together to build something new and wonderful. "Your war has been going on so long that you've forgotten what you were fighting for. But they remember what you were fighting to protect." Commander Vex stood in silence for a long time, watching the impossible sight of natural cooperation between species that had known nothing but conflict for 3,000 years. When he finally spoke, his voice was very quiet. "Is it possible that we have made an error in our calculations?" Captain Chun didn't answer directly. Instead, she asked a question that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "Commander, what would happen if you just stopped fighting?" The galaxy's most predictable war had found its first truly unpredictable element, and that element was asking questions that no one had thought to ask in 3,000 years. The meeting happened by accident, which was perhaps the only way it could have happened at all. Commander Vex of the Kethmori had come to the human settlement to investigate reports that his soldiers were fraternizing with the enemy. Hive Node Prime of the Vex Collective had arrived to analyze the humans' unprecedented behavior patterns. Neither commander had expected to encounter the other outside of combat. They found themselves face to face in the refugee center that Chief Petty Officer Wang had established. Between them sat 8-year-old Marcus Webb, son of one of the human engineers, who was teaching a mixed group of Kethmori and Vex children how to play a simple Earth game called Cooperation Tag. "The idea is simple," Marcus was explaining with the patient tone that only children can use when teaching confused adults. "Everyone works together to achieve the same goal. Nobody wins unless everybody wins." Commander Vex studied the game with the intensity he usually reserved for battle tactics. "But how do you determine the victor if all participants achieve success simultaneously?" "There is no victor," replied 8-year-old Tex Minor, one of the Kethmori children. "Victory is shared by all players." Hive Node Prime's skin shifted, color with confusion. "Shared victory violates fundamental competitive principles. Competition requires winners and losers." A young Vex drone child named Small 7 looked up at the adults with large, innocent eyes. Why must someone lose for someone else to win? The question hung in the air like a physical thing. Two of the most brilliant military minds in the galaxy stared at a child who had just asked something that neither of them could answer. Captain Chun chose that moment to enter the refugee center, carrying supplies for the evening meal. She took in the scene. Two enemy commanders standing awkwardly among playing children, both looking like they had just been asked to solve an impossible mathematical equation. "Gentlemen," she said politely, "I see you've met our junior diplomatic corps." "Captain Chun," Commander Vex said stiffly. "I have come to discuss the irregular behavior of my soldiers." "Affirmative," Hive Node Prime added. "Analysis of human actions has produced contradictory data. Clarification is required." Chen set down the supplies and looked at both commanders. "What seems to be the problem? My warriors are talking to the enemy," Commander Vex said, as if the words tasted strange in his mouth. "They share information about tactics, discuss their injuries, even express concern for enemy casualties." "Our drones exhibit similar anomalous behavior," Hive Node Prime confirmed. "They demonstrate empathy toward Kethmori soldiers. This contradicts all programming." Chun nodded thoughtfully. "And you find this disturbing?" "It violates every principle of warfare," Commander Vex declared. "It introduces variables that cannot be calculated," Hive Node Prime agreed. Marcus Webb, who had been listening to this conversation with the intense focus that children bring to adult puzzles, raised his small hand. "Excuse me," he said politely, "but why are you fighting?" The two commanders looked down at the boy. Commander Vex straightened his uniform. "We fight for the honor of our people and the right to claim this system. We fight to ensure collective Survival and optimal resource allocation, Hivenode Prime added. Marcus considered this seriously. But you've been fighting for a really long time, right? Like way longer than I've been alive? Correct. The war has continued for over 3,000 of your years. And neither of you has won yet? Both commanders looked uncomfortable. Victory is challenging to achieve, Commander Vex admitted. The enemy proves remarkably persistent, Hivenode Prime agreed. Marcus nodded as if this made perfect sense. So, you've been fighting for 3,000 years over who gets to use this planet. But nobody has actually been using it because you're too busy fighting. The silence that followed was profound. That seems kind of silly, Marcus continued with the brutal honesty that only children possess. Why don't you just share the planet? There's lots of room. Commander Vex looked like he had been struck by lightning. Share? Affirmative, Hivenode Prime said slowly. Define share in military context. Marcus sighed the way children do when adults are being particularly dense. Sharing means you both use the same thing. Like you could take turns mining different parts of the planet, or you could work together and mine it faster. My mom says that when people work together, they can do things that nobody can do alone. Chun watched the faces of both commanders as they processed this suggestion. It was like watching two incredibly sophisticated computers trying to run software they had never encountered before. Joint operations, Commander Vex said slowly, testing the concept. Coordinated resource extraction. Collaborative efficiency, Hivenode Prime mused. Combined capabilities producing enhanced output. For the first time in their conversation, both commanders looked directly at each other instead of at the humans. Your engineering capabilities are admirable, Commander Vex said carefully. Kethmori Precision Manufacturing Complements Collective. Adaptive design, Hivenode Prime replied with equal caution. Marcus beamed with the satisfaction of a problem solved. See, you already know how to work together. You just never tried. That evening, something happened that had not occurred in over 3,000 years. Commander Vex and Hivenode Prime sat down together in the human settlement's common area and began to talk, not to negotiate surrender terms, not to exchange threats or ultimatums. They simply talked. Dr. Sarah Kim, the expedition's xenobiologist, watched from a discreet distance and took careful notes. She was witnessing something that every xenosociologist had declared impossible: natural cooperation between species locked in generational conflict. The mathematical models are intriguing, Hivenode Prime was saying. Combined Kethmori-Vex mining operations could increase planetary resource extraction by 347%, while reducing military expenditure by 89%, Commander Vex added. Consulting his own calculations, the efficiency gains are substantial. Dr. Kim realized that both commanders were doing something they had probably never done before. They were imagining a future that didn't involve endless warfare. The conversation continued for hours. Two brilliant minds that had spent centuries calculating how to destroy each other began calculating how to build something together instead. By morning, they had produced a preliminary resource-sharing agreement that was more sophisticated than most galactic trade treaties. The news spread through both fleets with the speed of wildfire. For the first time in 3,000 years, the daily battle was postponed while fleet commanders studied the unprecedented cooperation agreement. The reaction was everything from confusion to outright panic. Admiral Vex of the Kethmori called an emergency war council. Commander Vex explained these reports of collaboration with the enemy. Commander Vex stood at attention, but there was something different about his posture. For the first time in his military career, he looked uncertain. Sir, I have discovered new tactical possibilities that were not previously considered. Such as not fighting. The silence in the war room was deafening. Admiral Vex looked like someone had suggested that gravity might occasionally flow upward. Not fighting, he repeated slowly. Commander, are you suggesting surrender? No, sir, I am suggesting ... partnership. Meanwhile, aboard the primary Vex vessel, a similar conversation was taking place. The collective's governing nodes were analyzing Hive Node Prime's report with growing alarm. Cooperation parameters exceed all calculated possibilities, declared. Prime Node 1. Explained deviation from standard military protocols. Human species introduced variables not present in original conflict algorithms, Hive Node Prime responded. New calculations suggest alternative solutions? Define alternative? Solutions. Working with enemy instead of against enemy. Shared goals instead of conflicting goals. Mutual benefit instead of zero-sum competition. The collective consciousness of the Vex struggled with these concepts like a computer trying to run incompatible software. For 3,000 years, their entire civilization had been organized around the principle that the Kethmori were obstacles to be removed. The idea that they could be partners was literally unthinkable until now. Back on the planet's surface, the cooperation experiment was expanding rapidly. Kethmori engineers were working alongside Vex technicians to repair the abandoned mining equipment. Human supervisors coordinated the efforts, but the real work was being done by former enemies who were discovering they had more in common than they had differences. Lieutenant Torres watched a Kethmori mechanic explain precision welding techniques to a group of Vex workers. It's like watching 3,000 years of stupidity evaporate in real time, she told Captain Chun. It's more than that, Chun replied. It's watching two species remember who they used to be before the war consumed them. The breakthrough came when Chief Engineer Rodriguez made a simple observation. You know, he said to the mixed work crew, if you combine Kethmori structural engineering with Vex adaptive materials, you could build mining equipment that's twice as efficient as anything either species has ever made. The silence that followed was different from the previous confused silences. This was the silence of minds racing, of possibilities opening, of 3,000 years of assumptions crumbling away. A Kethmori engineer named Tex9 looked at a Vex technician called Node 47. Your biometal compounds, he said slowly, they could integrate with our power systems. Affirmative, Node 47 replied, his skin shifting with excitement. Combined efficiency could exceed individual capabilities by significant margins. Within hours, the first truly collaborative Kethmori Vex technology was taking shape. It was a mining drone that used Kethmori precision targeting combined with Vex adaptive materials. The prototype worked better than anyone had dared to hope. More importantly, building it together had required both species to see each other as partners rather than enemies. That night, as both commanders prepared their reports for their respective fleets, a human child's question echoed in their minds. Why don't you just share? The galaxy's most predictable war was about to become something else entirely, and nobody knew quite what to call it yet. 6 months later, Commander Zix-9 of the Galactic Mediation Council stood on the observation deck of the new joint Kethmori Vex orbital station and tried to understand what he was seeing below them, the planet that had been fought over for 3,000 years buzzed with activity. Kethmori and Vex workers moved together in coordinated teams, operating mining equipment that neither species could have built alone. The efficiency was remarkable, but that wasn't what amazed the old commander. What amazed him was the laughter. He could hear it even through the station's hull. Workers of both species engaging in what could only be described as friendly competition over who could extract ore more efficiently. Kethmori engineers making jokes that Vex technicians actually understood. Former enemies sharing meals and comparing stories about their families. Still trying to figure out how we did it? Captain Chun asked, joining him at the observation window. Zia YX-9 turned to look at the human captain. In 6 months, she had accomplished something that 800 years of galactic diplomacy had failed to achieve. The war was over. Not ended by conquest or treaty, but simply ... I have studied conflict resolution for longer than most civilizations have existed, he said slowly. I have read every paper, analyzed every successful mediation, calculated every possible variable. None of my models predicted this outcome. Chun smiled and looked down at the bustling planet. That's because you were trying to solve the wrong problem. Explain. Everyone assumed this was a war about resources or territory or ideological differences, but it wasn't. It was a war about being stuck in a pattern and not knowing how to stop. Zix9 considered this, and the solution was to introduce chaos? Not chaos. Choice. For 3,000 years, both sides believed they only had two options, victory or defeat. We just showed them there was a third option, cooperation. The partnership trying to correct it. There's a difference. Cooperation is working together despite your differences. Partnership is working together because of your differences. Through the window, they watched a Kethmori supervisor explaining safety protocols to a mixed team while a Vex coordinator adapted the procedures in real time based on changing conditions. The combination of Kethmori structure and Vex flexibility had created something neither species could achieve alone. The productivity reports are extraordinary, Zix9 noted. Combined operations have increased output by over 400%, while reducing operational costs by 75%. More importantly, Chun said, look at them. Zix9 followed her gaze to see a group of Kethmori and Vex children playing together in the station's recreation area. They had invented a new game that required both species' natural abilities, and they were having the time of their lives. Those children will grow up thinking this is normal, Chun continued. They'll expect cooperation instead of conflict. They'll build on what their parents started and create something even better. And the other 17 contested systems? Chun's expression grew more serious. That's the real challenge. We proved it's possible here, but each system will require its own solution. Some conflicts run deeper than this one did. The Council has authorized expansion of human diplomatic intervention, Zix9 said. Your success here has not gone unnoticed. Good, but remember, we can't force peace on anyone. We can only show people that alternatives exist and help them find their own solutions. The conversation was interrupted by an announcement over the station's communication system. Admiral Vex and Hivenode Prime were about to present their joint report to the Galactic Council. Zix9 had been looking forward to this presentation for months. Two species that had never produced a single pacifist in their combined history were about to explain how they had discovered cooperation. The council chamber was packed with representatives from across the galaxy. Everyone wanted to hear how. The impossible had become possible. Admiral Vex stood at the podium with the same rigid military bearing he had displayed for centuries. But when he spoke, his words would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. Honored council members, he began, I stand before you not as a conqueror but as a student. The Kethmori Empire has learned something that fundamentally changes our understanding of warfare. He paused and looked toward Hivenode Prime, who stepped forward to continue the presentation. The Vex Collective has reached identical conclusions, the alien said in his strange, multi-toned voice. Our conflict was based on false assumptions. We believed that strength required the defeat of our enemies. We have learned that true strength comes from transforming enemies into allies. What followed was the most remarkable military briefing in galactic history. Two former enemies presented a joint analysis of how cooperation had proven more effective than conflict. They showed detailed projections of what similar partnerships could achieve in other systems, but the most powerful moment came when a child's voice was heard in the council chamber. May I say something? Everyone turned to see Marcus Webb, now 9 years old, standing with a group of Kethmori and Vex children who had grown up together in the joint settlement. Admiral Vex smiled, which was something no one had seen him do in over a century. The Council recognizes Marcus Webb, diplomatic advisor to the Kepler 442 settlement. Marcus walked to the podium with the confidence that only children possess when they know they're right about something important. Adults make things really complicated, he said simply. But sometimes the answer is easy. When people are fighting over something, just ask them to share. Most of the time, there's enough for everyone. He looked around the chamber at hundreds of alien faces representing dozens of species. My friends and I don't care what species. We just care about building cool things together and having fun. Maybe adults could try that too. The chamber was silent for a long moment. Then something unprecedented happened. The Galactic Council, which had never reached unanimous agreement on anything in its 10,000-year history, gave Marcus Webb a standing ovation. Later that evening, as the used Defiance prepared to depart for another troubled system, Captain Chun stood on the bridge looking at the thriving orbital station that had grown around the former battlefield. Lieutenant Torres joined her at the observation window. "Any regrets about leaving, Captain?" Chun smiled. "This was never about staying. This was about showing people what was possible. Now they can build something even better than what we started. Where to next?" Chun consulted her orders. "The Altair system. Apparently there's a three-way territorial dispute that's been going on for 2,000 years. The Council thinks we might be able to help," Torres grinned. "Another impossible situation?" "The best kind," Chun replied. As the Defiance moved away from Kepler 442c, its crew could see the lights of the joint settlement spreading across the planet's surface. What had once been a dead world, fought over but never used, was becoming a beacon of cooperation that could be seen across the galaxy. Dr. Kim was compiling her final report on the mission. Her conclusions would be studied in diplomatic academies for generations. "The key insight," she wrote, "is that humanity's greatest strength is not our technology, our military capability, or our intelligence. It is our refusal to accept that any problem is unsolvable. When faced with a situation that everyone else considers impossible, humans ask the one question that changes everything: what if we tried something different?" Chief Petty Officer Wang was reading bedtime stories to the human children aboard the ship. They had made friends with Kethmori and Vex children during their stay, and the separation had been difficult. "Will we see them again?" asked young Marcus. "Maybe," Wang said, "but more importantly, you've shown them something that will last forever. You've shown them that friendship is possible between any species, anywhere in the galaxy." "Even the scary ones?" Wang smiled. "Especially the scary ones. Sometimes the scariest beings just need someone to show them they don't have to be scary anymore." In his final log entry, Captain Chun wrote, "Mission successful. The war that couldn't be stopped has been replaced by a partnership that couldn't be predicted. Recommend expansion of cultural exchange programs and continued monitoring of joint Keth-Mori-Vex operations." She paused, then added, "Personal note, sometimes the most complex problems have the simplest solutions. You just have to be human enough to try them." The galaxy's most predictable war had become its most successful peace. And in 17 other star systems, ancient enemies were beginning to ask themselves a dangerous question: what if we tried something different? Commander Zix-9 remained at the observation station, documenting the ongoing success of the joint settlement. For the first time in 800 years, his reports were filled with hope instead of resignation. The war was over. The partnership was just beginning. And somewhere in the vast galaxy, a human ship was heading toward another impossible situation, ready to ask the questions that nobody else had thought to ask. The universe would never be quite the same again. And most species agreed that was probably for the best. Admiral Vex and Hivenode Prime had co-authored what would become the most widely read military strategy document in galactic history: Alternative Conflict Resolution through Resource Optimization and Mutual Cooperation. It was already being implemented in 12 other systems. The final report to the Galactic Council concluded with words that would define humanity's role in galactic affairs for centuries to come. When presented with an unsolvable problem, humans do not accept the impossibility of solution. Instead, they change the parameters of the problem until it becomes solvable. This ability to think outside established patterns makes them invaluable mediators in conflicts where all traditional approaches have failed. The galaxy had learned something important. Sometimes it takes a completely new perspective to solve an old problem. And sometimes that new perspective comes from a species crazy enough to believe that there's always another way. The war no one could stop had ended not with victory or defeat, but with the radical idea that everyone could win if they just tried working together, and that, according to the children who had made it possible, was really not that complicated at all.